brother laughed at me in front of everyone, told the world I wasn't even family. He thought it was funny. He didn't know the DNA results were already in my hands. My name is Blake. I'm 32 years old and I work as an architect in Chicago. I'm quiet, reserved, never the type to fight back loudly. I value hard work, loyalty, and family above everything. When people lie to me, I don't argue. I stay silent. I stay still. But I remember, and I plan. Family reunions have a way of dressing old wounds in new smiles. When I first walked into the rented banquet hall, the warm lights and chatter gave me hope that maybe, just maybe this time would be different. Round tables draped in white cloths, the smell of catered food, the clinking of glasses. It all felt like the opening act of something peaceful. Cousins I hadn't seen in years hugged me. Aunts pinched my cheek like I was still 10. And for a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to believe I belonged. I scanned the crowd, my eyes eventually landing on him, Ethan, my older brother. He stood at the center of attention as always, charming, loud, and effortlessly magnetic. People gravitated toward him like moths to flame. He spotted me across the room and lifted his glass in a casual salute. I nodded back, keeping my expression calm, though my stomach tightened. Our relationship had always been a complicated balance of shadows and light. He was the golden child, taller, louder, sharper in his wit. I was the quieter one, the listener, the one who watched and remembered. People said we were different in every way, and perhaps they were right. But still, I carried a small ember of hope that tonight, surrounded by family, we could find common ground. As the evening unfolded, I let myself relax. I caught up with cousins, shared stories of my work as an architect in Chicago, and even laughed at old childhood tales. The tension in my shoulders eased. Maybe time had smoothed out the rough edges of our past. Maybe Ethan had grown into the kind of brother I always wanted. Then he approached me. "Blake," he said, clapping me on the back a little harder than necessary. "Still sketching buildings and hiding behind blueprints?" His grin was wide, and though the words cut, his tone was wrapped in playful charm. People around us chuckled. I forced a smile. "That's me," I replied evenly. "Still building things that last." He laughed, drawing the attention of more family members. "Meanwhile, I'm busy building memories, real ones, not the kind you draw on paper." Another round of laughter. I stayed quiet, my face calm. Inside, though, I felt the first prick of unease, but then something shifted. For a few minutes, we stood side by side, sipping our drinks, and it almost felt normal. He spoke about his job, his kids, the stress of juggling responsibilities. I listened, nodding where it felt right. For a flicker of time, I thought maybe this reunion really had a chance to heal. Dinner was served, and we all gathered at the long tables. Plates clattered, glasses clinked, conversations overlapped in waves. I sat across from Ethan, who was already telling a story animatedly, his hands cutting through the air. Family leaned in, drawn to his energy. I watched, silent but observant as always. For those first hours, the glow of the reunion held me. I felt tethered to something I had always longed for, a family that saw me, accepted me. The hall was filled with laughter, and I let the sound wash over me like a fragile balm. But deep inside, a whisper warned me. Ethan's smiles were too sharp, his laughter too loud. It was only a matter of time before the mask slipped, and the glow of the reunion would flicker into something darker. And though no one else saw it, I did. I always did. The first jab came wrapped in laughter. That's how Ethan always worked. He never stabbed directly, not at first. He'd smile, lean back in his chair, and toss out a remark so casually that people mistook cruelty for humor. It began when one of our cousins asked about our childhood. They wanted to hear old stories, mischief, secrets, anything funny. Ethan leaned forward, grinning, and said, "Oh, Blake? He's always been the odd one out. You know, the special delivery our parents decided to keep." Laughter rippled through the table. At first, people thought he was joking in the harmless way siblings do. But I knew that tone, that pointed edge under his words. My fork froze halfway to my mouth, though I kept my face blank. Someone nudged Ethan playfully. "Special delivery? What's that supposed to mean?" Ethan smirked, clearly enjoying the attention. "You know, the adoption story. Blake wasn't really one of us. He was just added in." The table broke into uneasy laughter again. Some tried to wave it off, others chuckled nervously. But the damage was done. His words had landed. My adoption, the piece of my life I had made peace with quietly, was now a weapon in his hands. I lowered my eyes to my plate, pushing food around with my fork. Outwardly, I looked calm, unbothered. Inwardly, my chest burned with humiliation. I remembered my parents telling me when I was 12. They had sat me down gently, voices soft, explaining that I was chosen, not abandoned, that my adoption was an act of love. I had carried that truth close, almost proudly, like a hidden strength. Now Ethan was twisting it into something shameful, something for others to laugh at. He leaned back in his chair, satisfied. "Don't worry," he added with mock seriousness. "We've always treated him like one of us. Most of the time." This time, the laughter was louder. It rang in my ears, drowning out the clinking of silverware and the hum of conversation. My jaw tightened. I forced myself not to react, not to give him the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. Inside, I repeated the same mantra. Stay silent. Stay still, remember. After the laughter died down, conversation drifted elsewhere, but I stayed in my quiet place, detached, my mind replaying every syllable. Each word of his was like a blade carefully pressed against my skin. He wasn't done, not yet. This was only the beginning. Later, while drinks flowed and people grew louder, Ethan struck again. He told a story about when we were kids, about me being the quiet one who never really fit in. Then he winked at the table. Guess that's what happens when you're not cut from the same cloth. This time I caught the shift in the room. A few cousins exchanged awkward glances. An aunt coughed into her napkin. Not everyone found it funny anymore, but no one said anything. They let the words hang, let them sit there like poison. And Ethan smiled, triumphant, because silence was the same as approval. I took a slow sip of water, steadying my breath. My calm face betrayed nothing, but inside a vow was forming. He thought he was winning, thought he was chipping away at me piece by piece. What he didn't realize was that every word, every laugh at my expense was fuel. And one day I'd return every wound he gave me with interest. By the second night of the reunion, Ethan had grown bolder. His laughter carried louder, his jokes sharper, and his audience more complicit. The more the room indulged him, the deeper he cut. I had learned long ago that humiliation was his favorite weapon. It wasn't enough for him to strike in private. He wanted witnesses. He wanted applause. Dinner that evening was set in the main hall of the lodge, a wide, warm space lined with wooden beams and family portraits. The long table was crowded with cousins, aunts, uncles, plates of roast chicken, and glasses of wine that clinked too easily. There was a buzz in the air, the kind that comes when people feel comfortable, when they believe they're safe. For me, it was the perfect storm. Ethan waited until everyone had eaten enough to be softened, until laughter was flowing and defenses were down. Then he leaned forward, his voice just loud enough to command the table. "You know," he said, swirling his glass of wine, "we should tell the story of how Blake joined the family." The chatter died down. My chest tightened. He looked at me directly, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "Come on, Blake, don't be shy. You know the one." I stayed still, hands folded on the table. I gave him nothing, so he took the stage himself. "Well, the short version," he said, pausing for effect, "is that Blake was a surprise package. Our parents decided to bring him home out of pity maybe, or charity. Honestly, I've never been sure." A few people chuckled nervously. My stomach dropped, though my face didn't move. "And the best part?" Ethan continued, voice rising now, feeding off the attention. "He spent his whole life trying to prove he belongs. Always working harder, always quieter, like he's afraid someone will notice he's not really one of us." This time, the laughter wasn't uneasy. It was full, loud, cruel. People leaned into each other, shaking their heads, smiling at his performance. Even those who knew better stayed silent. I sat there still as stone. I forced my breathing to stay slow, steady. My fingers dug lightly into the underside of the table, hidden from view. I could hear my pulse in my ears, a steady drumbeat against the storm of laughter. When it finally died down, I spoke. Just one line. Calm. Flat. "You've always loved an audience, Ethan." The table quieted. Some glanced at me, surprised I'd spoken at all. Ethan smirked. "Well, someone has to make dinner entertaining." He thought he'd won. To him, my stillness was weakness, my silence surrender. But inside me, something shifted that night. That was the moment the line was crossed, not by the joke itself, but by the way everyone let it stand. Their laughter, their silence, their cowardice, it all carved into me deeper than Ethan's words alone. I knew then that I could never simply forgive and move on. Not this time. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling for hours. My mind replayed the scene in loops, the laughter, his smirk, my own restraint. It hurt, yes, but it also clarified something sharp and undeniable. Ethan believed he was untouchable. He believed my silence was permanent, but silence, I realized, could also be a weapon, and mine had just begun sharpening. After that dinner, after the laughter, after Ethan's smirk, something inside me quieted. It wasn't the silence of defeat. No, it was the silence of sharpening steel, of a bowstring pulled back and held. I walked through the rest of the reunion like a ghost, calm on the outside, storming on the inside. The others went about their days as if nothing had happened. Morning coffee in the kitchen, hikes through the woods, card games in the lounge. They greeted me with polite smiles, as though my humiliation at dinner had evaporated overnight. But I remembered. I always remembered. Whenever Ethan walked into a room, his voice filled it first. Loud, commanding, careless. He reveled in attention, in the way eyes gravitated toward him. I noticed how easily people laughed at his smallest jokes, how quickly they agreed with his opinions. He believed the family revolved around him, that his orbit was unshakable. I, on the other hand, became smaller. I spoke little. I lingered on the edges of conversations, watching instead of joining. My stillness unnerved some of them. I could see it in the sideways glances, the awkward pauses when they noticed me listening without reacting. People don't know what to do with silence. It makes them uneasy. At night, I lay awake in the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling beams of the old lodge. I thought about my life, how much of it had been defined by silence. Silence when Ethan mocked me as a child. Silence when relatives compared us, always favoring him. Silence when my adoption was twisted into a punchline. But that silence had never been empty. It had always been storage. A reservoir filling up, waiting for its time. That week, it brimmed to the edge. One evening I walked alone by the lake behind the lodge. The air was cold enough to sting, the water black beneath the fading sky. My reflection stared back at me, steady, unflinching. I thought about my mother, the woman who had chosen me, who had fought for me, who had told me I was enough. She would not have laughed at Ethan's joke. She would not have stayed silent, but I was not my mother. My methods were different. In the quiet by the lake, I made a promise to myself. I would not confront Ethan in anger. I would not shout, argue, or demand an apology that would never come. I would do something far more lasting. I would show him and everyone else what truth looks like when it's undeniable. The stillness inside me crystallized that night. I no longer needed to convince myself of who I was or beg for anyone's approval. I knew what I had to do. When I walked back into the lodge, I carried the same calm expression as always. I nodded politely, answered questions when spoken to, even smiled faintly at Ethan's next round of jokes. On the surface, nothing had changed, but beneath it, everything had. That day, the planning began, not with papers or evidence yet, but in my mind. In silence, the first step was patience. Real revenge isn't loud, it's meticulous. Ethan had mocked me in front of everyone, wielding my adoption like a weapon. If I wanted to strike back, I needed precision, not emotion, and so I began my work quietly, invisibly, the way I always lived. It started with conversations, subtle, harmless at first. Over morning coffee, I asked relatives about family history, about how far back our bloodline could be traced. I let them ramble, feigning interest, nodding in the right places. People love to talk when they think you're listening, and Ethan was no different. He often spoke of pure roots, of how our lineage was unshakable. His pride in being the true son was boundless. I tucked every word away like ammunition. The second step was information. While the others played cards one evening, I went to the study. The old house had shelves lined with albums, genealogy notes, and boxes of letters yellowed by time. I sifted through them slowly, reading names, dates, patterns. And then, in the margins of an old notebook, I found something unusual. An entry crossed out hastily. A name, a date that didn't match the rest. My chest tightened. It wasn't proof yet, but it was enough to push me forward. I thought about my humiliation at the dinner table, about Ethan's laughter echoing in the room. Every time I hesitated, I remembered that sound. And it steeled me. I ordered a DNA test kit too, in fact. It wasn't difficult. A quick delivery to the lodge disguised among other packages. Nobody paid attention when boxes arrived. Groceries and supplies came often for a family that large. I kept mine tucked safely in my suitcase waiting. The challenge was getting Ethan to take it. He was arrogant, but he was also competitive. So I baited him. One afternoon, while sitting on the porch, I mentioned casually, "You ever wonder about our ancestry? Where we really come from?" He scoffed, waving his hand. "I don't need a test to tell me who I am. Unlike you, I know my bloodline." His words were meant to sting, but I didn't flinch. I only smiled faintly, letting silence do the work. People hate silence. It makes them fill the space themselves. Sure enough, he leaned forward, eyes glinting. "Why, you planning to prove something?" That was my opening. "I'm just curious. Thought it might be fun. I ordered a kit. There's another one if you're not afraid to take it." I could see the spark in his eyes, the challenge. Ethan could never back down when pride was on the line. "Fine," he said. "I'll do it. But don't cry when the results remind you who doesn't belong here." He laughed at his own words, but I didn't. I only nodded, calm, storing the moment. That night I sat at the desk in my room, staring at the 2 sealed envelopes that would soon hold our samples. My hands were steady. My heart was not. I knew this was more than just a test, it was the key. A way to shift the narrative Ethan had written for years. If I was right about what I had found in those notes, then the truth would not just humiliate him. It would erase the foundation of his pride. And the best part? He was walking straight into it, blind, arrogant, and laughing. The plan was no longer just in motion. It was alive. Days passed with a quiet tension hanging in the air. Ethan had no idea what he had agreed to. For him, the DNA test was nothing more than another chance to flex his arrogance, to prove once again that I was the outsider. But for me, those little tubes of saliva were grenades, primed and waiting to detonate. I mailed them off carefully, making sure no one noticed. The post run at the lodge was casual. People sent postcards, letters, the occasional parcel. Nobody thought twice when I slipped the envelopes into the stack. As the box swallowed them, a strange calm settled over me. The trap was set. Now all I needed was time, but I couldn't just sit and wait. The silence would give him too much control. So I began with smaller strikes, carefully placed words that would wedge doubt into his confidence. At breakfast, while the family gathered around pancakes and coffee, I leaned back and said lightly, "Funny thing about family stories. Sometimes they're not as solid as we think. Records get lost, names get mixed up." Ethan looked up sharply, his fork pausing midair. "What are you babbling about now?" I shrugged. "Just saying. I found some old notes in the study. Dates didn't quite match up. Guess nothing's perfect, right?" His jaw tightened just barely, but enough for me to see. He forced a laugh and stabbed at his plate. "Unlike you, some of us don't need papers to prove we belong." The others chuckled politely, but I caught the flicker in their eyes. Just a flicker of curiosity. A seed planted. Later that day, I took another step. While Ethan bragged about his upcoming promotion at work, I asked almost innocently, "Didn't you ever wonder if we're all really as connected as we think? Like, what if the bloodline wasn't as pure as the stories?" He rolled his eyes, but his voice had a sharp edge now. "You really are obsessed with this. Desperate, aren't you? Wanting so badly to belong." I met his stare, unflinching. "Maybe I just want the truth." "Even if it's not what we expect," he barked a laugh, but it was forced this time, too loud, too brittle. The others shifted uncomfortably. He noticed, and that was the first real crack in his armor. By evening, I could feel the balance shifting. For years, he had dictated the story, painting me as the outsider, but now, with a few careful words, I had turned his certainty into something fragile. He couldn't brush it off completely, not when others had heard me question the foundation he stood on. The DNA results were still weeks away, but I didn't need them yet. I could already sense the pressure building in him. His laughter was louder than usual, his remarks sharper, his presence more overbearing, as if he had to fight to keep control of the room. That was the beauty of it. He didn't even realize I was the one pulling the strings now. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I thought of his face at the breakfast table, the tiny twitch in his jaw, the faint crease in his brow. They were small victories, but victories nonetheless. Revenge, I was learning, didn't always need explosions. Sometimes it was the slow erosion of certainty, the quiet planting of fear. The DNA test would be the hammer that shattered his pride, but these moments, These were the chisels carving away at his confidence one strike at a time, and I was only just beginning. The envelope arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning. Ordinary paper, ordinary print, yet inside it carried the weight of decades of silence and arrogance. I found it tucked neatly in the stack of mail, almost invisible. For a moment I just held it in my hands, tracing the edges, feeling the pulse of everything I had waited for. No one else noticed. Not yet. At dinner that night, the entire family gathered in the lodge's dining room. The fire crackled, laughter bounced off the wood-paneled walls, and Ethan was in his usual position. Loud, confident, filling the space with his presence. He didn't know that every word he spoke was his last as the unchallenged storyteller. I slipped the envelope onto the table, calm, quiet, precise. "What's that?" my uncle asked. "Answers," I said simply. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Silence spread like smoke. Ethan scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Oh, don't tell me you actually went through with that. A DNA test? God, Blake, you're pathetic. Trying so hard to make yourself fit in." I didn't reply. I just opened the envelope. The paper rustled softly, a sound sharper than any insult he had ever thrown. I read aloud, slowly, clearly. The words cut through the room like knives. "Results show. Ethan, you are not biologically related to Dad. 0% probability." For a heartbeat, no one moved. The fire crackled, a fork clattered against a plate, and Ethan's smirk froze, cracking like glass. He laughed, too loud, too forced. "That's ridiculous. Some kind of mistake. These things aren't accurate." But I laid down the official seal, the certificate of authenticity. "It's accurate, and it's final." The family stared. Faces shifted from confusion to disbelief, from pity to something Ethan had never seen directed at him before. Doubt. My mother whispered, "No, that can't be." But her voice carried no conviction. Ethan's face drained of color. He tried to stand taller, to reclaim his throne, but every second stripped another layer from him. His laughter faltered. His hands shook. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. For years he had mocked me for being adopted, for being the outsider. And now in one silent turn he was the one without blood to claim. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just sat there, steady, calm, watching him crumble under the truth. They laughed. I just nodded. Ethan's voice rose again, desperate now. "This means nothing." "I'm still his son. I was raised here. I carry this family's name." "Yes," I said evenly. "And you mocked me for the very same thing." The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. He opened his mouth again, but no words came. For once he had no weapon left. The meal ended in fragments. Conversations died. Chairs scraped quietly as family members excused themselves, each carrying the shock like a stone in their chest. Ethan sat motionless, eyes darting from face to face, searching for someone to defend him. No one did, not this time. That night, as I walked outside into the cold air, I breathed deeply. The truth had landed. Not with rage, not with violence, but with the quiet weight of undeniable proof. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the outsider. I didn't feel small. And Ethan? He was the one standing on the outside now, pounding against glass no one would break for him. The morning after the truth came out, the lodge felt different. Not louder, not chaotic, just quieter. The kind of silence that follows a storm when the trees are stripped bare and the air feels new, almost raw. I woke early, before the others, and walked down to the lake. The water was still, a mirror reflecting the pale dawn sky. For years I had stood at this very spot feeling like a shadow among them, half included, half forgotten. Now, the reflection staring back at me wasn't the same man who had arrived. Inside the lodge I could hear muted voices. No laughter this time. Conversations were hushed, careful, like everyone was stepping across broken glass. Ethan's name wasn't spoken. Not directly, but his absence was loud. He hadn't come down for breakfast. He hadn't joined them in the living room, and for once no one went searching for him. I didn't feel triumphant. That was never the goal. Revenge isn't about fireworks, it's about balance. Ethan had spent a lifetime tipping the scale against me, using cruelty as his currency. Now the weight was evenly set. Truth had done what anger never could. As the day went on, relatives avoided my eyes, unsure what to say. A few offered small nods of respect, quiet acknowledgments that things had shifted. My uncle patted my shoulder once without a word. My mother looked at me differently, not with pity but with something closer to pride. And Ethan? He finally emerged in the evening. His face was pale, his shoulders hunched. For the first time in my life, he looked fragile. He avoided me. He avoided everyone. The family he once commanded no longer turned toward him. He was no longer the center. He was just another figure on the edge of the room. I didn't approach him. I didn't need to. The truth had already spoken louder than anything I could ever say. That night, as I packed my bag to leave, I felt lighter. Not joyful. Revenge isn't joy. It's release. The knot inside me had loosened. The years of silence, of swallowing insults, of carrying his voice inside my head, they had ended. On the drive home, I thought about my mother, about her fight to bring me into her life, about how Ethan had mocked me for something that had once been my greatest wound. Now that wound had closed, not with rage, but with clarity. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need to prove myself to Ethan or to anyone else. I had found peace not because he was destroyed, but because I was no longer chained to his shadow. And as the road stretched ahead of me, quiet and endless, I whispered to myself, I wasn't trying to win. I was ending it.